Recording in progress.
Good morning. We're calling to order the Retail Committee meeting, Retail Committee regular meeting on Wednesday, August 21, 2024. Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Councilmember Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Lifcott-Haynes.
Here.
Chair Koo.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. And the first order is to go to public comments, please.
We have no request to speak for general public comment.
Okay, very good. We'll go to action items, which is verbal staff updates, beginning with Downtown Business District. Good morning, Ashwani and Steve.
Good morning, Chair Koo and members of the committee. Today we'll be presenting updates for the University Avenue Business District from Ashwini. This is really meant to give an update on work that's been underway downtown and really help contextualize everything we've got going on. As this committee well knows, we have the University Avenue Streetscape project underway as a large infrastructure project, but as Ashwini will get into, there's a lot of work going on beyond that that's happening in the interim. And so we want to make sure there's a forum to discuss that with the retail committee. And without further ado, I'm happy to turn it over to Ashwini.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And good morning, council members. We're going to, as Steve mentioned, I'm going to give you quick updates in 3 areas. And this is in response to the discussion we had at the June 3rd council meeting in terms of the planned improvements downtown. So besides the University Avenue Streetscape project, there's a lot going on. And so we just wanted to touch upon that briefly, give you an update on what's happening with stakeholder engagement related to various things in downtown, and then also a brief update on the parklets program. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. And again, this just summarizes, there's a couple of slides that provide more detail. So this just summarizes sort of improvement areas and projects, and I'll get into those in the next slides. But if we can look at the timeline. So when we talked in June with council about University Avenue, there were some questions about what's happening in the interim, given that the long-term streetscape improvement project is quite a few years out. And so we wanted to talk about sort of near-term, mid-term, and long-term. You asked for us to come back with you with some activities that are going to happen there and defining it. So we're looking at near-term as this fiscal year, mid-term as a couple of fiscal years after that, so 26 and 27, and then 28 and beyond would be the long-term improvements. Next slide, please. And then the slides, there's kind of 3 areas. So it's really kind of cleaning and maintenance and maybe minor improvements. And that's this slide. And then we'll talk about policies and ordinances and then planned projects. And again, all of this is kind of supporting that ultimate goal of, economic vibrancy, thriving retail in downtown. And so improvements, we've talked about this, enhanced cleaning and additional trash pickup. Those are pilots right now, and based on the effectiveness and funding available, those would be ongoing. Again, I'm going to try and keep this brief, and then we have time for questions, and there's staff available if you have additional questions about this. On the news racks, we have actually removed the majority of them now since we last talked. There's about 20 more, and then we're going to be looking at consolidation. So the removal has been for abandoned, damaged news racks. And then the Business Improvement District, just wanted to note that we will this fiscal year kind of restart that process to just activate the existing bid, not looking at a different model, but that bid funding will then offset some of these enhanced services. Next slide, please. And here's some of the enhanced cleaning that Public Works staff has been doing, additional hours of trash pickup and additional staff deployed for cleaning downtown. Next slide. Now, there's various policies and ordinances that I think council has talked about before. They're part of the economic development strategy as well. I'll start out with the parklets program. So that's the ongoing parklets program that council approved, again, to facilitate outdoor dining, draw visitors, and implementation is underway. Outdoor dining standards for car-free streets, that's something that we are working on and anticipate engaging stakeholders. For Ramona, CalAV is already underway, and you'll be getting a more detailed update on that. Ground floor retail ordinance, that is a discussion that will be brought to you. I believe next meeting, and then to council. So that'll be something that'll be brought forward in an ordinance form if it's something council wishes to move forward with. Vacant storefronts, we've talked about that. That's also part of the plan to kind of research and evaluate program options, look at what different cities are doing, and then to come back for a discussion with this committee and then the council. Used oil storage, again, just to promote more cleanliness, kind of how it's disposed in alleys. That is something that we will be bringing forward to discuss with council. Next slide, please. And then there's several projects in the 5-year CIP. I think you've seen rolled out the automated parking guidance system for 4 downtown garages. There's several sidewalk and curb ramp improvements that happen on an annual basis. The new downtown garage is restarting design this fiscal year. Of course, University Avenue Streetscape project, and we'll be bringing you a more detailed update on that at the next meeting. In terms of where we're at, we took direction from you in June, again, beginning stakeholder outreach, and we'll be bringing back some of the discussion on that. There's improvements happening in the alley from University Avenue to the Cowper-Webster garage. Tunnel improvements planned, lighting, painting, and some other work that needs to be done there. We talked about a mid-block crosswalk at council potentially happening at Hamilton and Centennial Alley connecting to University Avenue. So that's something we'll be looking at incorporating in the next year CIP. And there's a few public art projects related to kind of the utility boxes, murals, and then potentially public art in downtown and other plazas as part of the streetscape project. And then improvements to downtown parking lots, various parking lots. Next slide, please. I won't go over this in detail. It's something you've seen, but we've talked about a comprehensive stakeholder strategy for downtown with a stakeholder working group, kind of engaging the downtown and Palo Alto community at large, obviously engaging the boards, commissions, and committees at various appropriate milestones, and then bringing updates to you and the city council. Next slide, please. So here's a status update on where we're at. So we did a lot of outreach asking for interest to be in the stakeholder working group. We have received applications from a variety, as you may remember, it's businesses, community partners, and resident representatives. And the stakeholder working group will be open to the public as well. So we are in the process of finalizing the group, and then we anticipate having the first stakeholder working group in early September. We will be seeking input from this group and also have similar questions through a community survey that we'll do through Open Town Hall. And then, as I mentioned, we'll bring back information to you. We'll be incorporating some of the input into the project scope and concepts, and then bring back to you for discussion as well. We'll also be talking to them about special events. That's an area that we said we would get feedback from stakeholders on specifically. And on parklets, again, we have ongoing stakeholder engagement efforts. I have a brief update on parklets. I'll get into that in more detail. And Ramona Street stakeholder engagement for the car-free portion will begin this fall. We are in the process of hiring a consultant. Next slide, please. So on the ongoing parklets program, as you may recall, we had kind of a phased implementation plan. And pre-applications have been received for 24 of the 25 parklets, existing parklets. There's only one parklet that decided not to move forward. We've started receiving applications. License fees have been paid by all the parklets except for the ones on Emerson because they can't build yet until the paving's done. We have our user guide and the pre-approved design shop drawings available for people to use. Some have indicated interest, others are kind of looking at it. And we have a dedicated webpage with all of the resources available. We have ongoing communication with stakeholders. And again, the full implementation, enforcement will happen beginning November 1st. So we are having kind of a phased approach that allows them to take advantage of the summer outdoor dining months, and then they can begin either rebuilding or modifying their existing parklet. And then just as a reminder, the Ramona Street outdoor dining and parklets remain under the temporary program through March of next year, by which time we hope to have the outdoor standards in effect. And I think this is just, again, the timeline here is where we are at in August, and this is all on track. It's the same timeline you've seen before. And with that, available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwini. So let's go to council members for questions. And are we taking public comments on each of these? So why don't we go to public comments first?
So our first request is from Paul B. And if you don't think you can sit here. Can you sit?
Thank you. My name is Paul Brophy. I live on Channing Avenue. Just as an opening comment, my career was in retail development and investment. And prior to that, I used to do a fair amount of consulting for both investors and developers, as well as municipalities on retail projects of various sorts, including downtowns. And getting straight to the point, it seems to me the whole approach that I see here is in the category of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. You're dealing with, I mean, I think first thing we need to look at is if you look at downtown University, California Avenue, compare it to other downtowns nearby, Mountain View, Redwood City, even Menlo Park, Palo Alto has clearly underperformed over the last few years. I mean, that's just anybody, you don't need to be a professional to see, you just have a set of eyes to see that. And it seems to me that the biggest problem has been vast amounts of both time and money have been spent on minor issues that do not address the fundamental problems. It's better to have clean streets than dirty streets. You need some process to have parklets, although ideally you'd want one that does not, take a great deal of time and money from the businesses you're supposedly trying to help. I think that you need to, it seems to me that rather than this whole kind of multi-year approach, that you should be looking at what steps can we do to turn things around, to get, at the very least, get us up to where our neighboring communities are. And from what I'm not active I've only lived here about 8 or 9 years, and my knowledge of what's happening in the city is pretty much what I read in the papers, for whatever that's worth. But it seems to me there's a consistent process of extreme amounts of time and money spent on studies and agonizing over every little detail, a focus on micromanaging every issue rather than trying to create an environment where businesses will want to come to downtown and and liven up the community. And I think that's probably it. I mean, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. But I just think this whole approach of spending years on matters that will in the end make little to no difference is just the wrong approach that we've been doing as a community. I hope nobody takes this as a personal insult. I think it's a process issue in town with it. Both that the people we have, we the community, have set values that come through. And can I finish my last sentence? I'm almost done. That we can, the values we've set is that that's the way we like it. And unfortunately, that's the price we're going to have to pay in terms of having a downtown that is doing far worse than what should be expected. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have no other requests.
Thank you so much. Okay, back to council, back to the committee. Any, Councilmember Burke, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a number of things, so I don't know whether I want to take a couple bites of the apple, but first, thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate how a lot of this report has been responsive to a number of the suggestions that the council has made and how it's broken down in between the near term, medium term, and long term. I think that kind of as a starting point, I agree with the premise that for those of us who have known the downtown for decades, it really has gradually deteriorated in its condition and its attractiveness to retail. We rode off of our laurels of being a center for tech workers in the downtown area, a regional center as the entire tech economy was thriving. And in the current conditions where we have some form of hybrid work that will be significant long-term, combined with more online purchases of goods, combined with an even greater migration to Stanford Shopping Center. If you compare the stores that are in our downtown versus the stores that are, say, in Burlingame's downtown, they have many of the high-end chain stores that we have at Stanford Shopping Center. Our community would go, why don't we have some of those stores? We actually do in Palo Alto. We have our own competition to the downtown, which is the Stanford Shopping Center, which is a regional and even international attraction, providing great retail sales dollars and many benefits. But it actually has pulled away from the downtown ever since its inception in the 1950s. And this has been a discussion, and that has had a new wave in just the last couple of years post-COVID. So those are headwinds that we're dealing with. And I've, in speaking with folks and thinking about it more, I really think that we need to even more kickstart the near term and the mid-term efforts. While we look at that long-term plan, which really could be quite a while and has very open-ended questions on the funding, but even the midterm has funding questions because these are not insignificant dollars. The long term was looking at basically some form of private assessments of property owners, which then get passed down to the tenants. So they're really not fees on that the property owners are imposing on themselves. They're fees that they're agreeing to impose on their tenants. And one of our current problems is we have a lot of vacancies while our rents remain the highest in the region and amongst the highest in the country for retail downtown, at least according to the reports that we have available. I'm sure below the surface, there are other factors, and there may be some property owners who are giving incentives. But what had happened for decades when we had the downturns was that property owners would not reduce their rents to attract tenants during the dot-com bust, during the Great Recession. And I spoke with a lot of the property owners and the brokers, and they said they just had faith that this would recover and be this nationally premier and therefore highest retail property lease rates in the country. And that, in fact, did happen each of those times. I'm less sanguine that that'll happen with these changing, really structural changes that have happened today. But we have a difficult time forcing property owners to make their own economic decisions. And it's compounded by many of those owners have a low debt basis because they've owned them a long time. They have low property taxes because they've owned them a long time, and they can afford to wait it out. And it's not because no one wants to open in on University Avenue, although there's less demand than there was. But it's also because of exceptionally high rents. So that does go to one policy discussion that I've been very hesitant on. We've at the council talked about vacancy tax. I'm still disinclined to have vacancy taxes kick in quickly. But if a property has been vacant for years, not a year, then this may be something we need to consider. But one of the things that I thought, and I'm interested in the legality of, is whether those revenues, if we should consider a vacancy tax on long-term vacancies, where those revenues could be placed into the improvement district, not the general fund. And I think that there would be a lot more support for that concept if it was clear that the dollars were going to go into helping the downtown and everybody there, property owners and tenants alike. On the nearer term measures, we have a number of them. One is I'd really like to see on every measure timeline estimates. When are we intending to have what done? As opposed to, sometime in the next 2 to 3 years or sometime in this fiscal year. Because on some of these they're overdue and there's a great deal of anxiousness to see things actually happen. And if they haven't happened yet, at least to see a concrete date on when it's going to happen. Because there's building and building frustration that we're talking and they're not seeing the actual actions happen. I know that there is now a lot more momentum on this, but one of the things that we can do to help everybody, the residents, the retailers, the property owners alike, is what we haven't done yet, that we're clear this and this will be done on this date is our goal. We slip a month or so, that's not the end of the earth, but it's different from kind of this open-ended, we're working on it. Then there are issues, we had members of the public speak about conditions in Lot Q. And who knows Lot Q very well? It's one of our public parking lots that is a public and private parking lot. And we have another one at 800 High. I don't know how many others of this. I sat with those people and had a presentation of the conditions there, and it's pretty appalling. And clearly, we really hadn't thought of Lot Q in the same way as we think of our other public parking lots. It's so appalling that the public is not parking there much. So here we've had this public parking problem, and we're looking at utilizing lots for affordable housing without losing parking. But this is a circumstance where not only do we have an obligation to the residents there who are no longer using their own private parking because of safety and filth and homeless encampments in there, but it's compounding our downtown parking needs. It's a good location. We've never on some of these public-private lots, we have signage, but most of the public doesn't know it's publicly available. I'll bet if you do a survey, you'll find hardly anybody knows these are actually public lots. Same thing with the 800 High lot. And there are a lot of other little things, things that I've seen on, pavement conditions, tree wells that are in bad shape, tree replacements sometimes that just saw in Cal Ave, and maybe those are in the works to be fixed right away. As we're reducing the number of newspaper racks that are redundant and dilapidated, additional bike racks, additional seating, or other street furniture that we can show that we're making some progress, even if it's not the medium or the long-term plans. And then we've had complaints about for some time about drug dealing in and vicinity of Lytton Plaza, and that it's an ongoing problem. I don't know to what extent it's been improved in recent months, because I haven't had an update. And maybe our police department has taken proactive measures. It was one of the things that was raised when this was last at the council. But those kinds of things are real detriments to the community going there and to businesses. It's part and parcel with, the cleanups that we do on making this, even before we do physical changes of capital investment, these short-term things to make it right. We also had discussions a few months ago about the reputation we have for permitting on retail. And I was real glad to see the next wave of permit reforms going in our development center on home improvements, and that's great. But I haven't heard anything about what we're doing to streamline the retail permitting. And what we hear is that's a real issue for Palo Alto, a reputational problem that has been there for a long time, that businesses were willing to tolerate because in the past they so badly wanted to be there. But that's no longer the case. And we shouldn't have had it either way, but now it compounds our other issues. You mentioned potential public art, but I thought it was actually planned murals in public art.
Yes, thank you, council member. So there is some planned public art, so 3 murals and the utility boxes. And then what's kind of potential is, a downtown garage, and then any public art projects related to the streetscape project.
Great. Okay, so 2 categories there. The planned, I definitely get that in the near term listed and make sure everybody understands it. I think it's very positive. I think murals are, the public really loves them when they're good murals, and the utility boxes as well. One other thing related to the parklets is the type of heating. And we had discussions on this 2 years ago. I haven't seen anything that's updated that provides the restaurants with a better understanding of really what are the options on heating. We just talked about what we prohibit, and of the gas propane open heaters inside. But there are options that are actually more cost effective and better performance. There are heat pumps that when they're enclosed parklets, they're far more efficient on the heating. And it's a heat pump where even the gas ones are externally placed, and they just heat much better than these propane portable units. Better yet is either electric heat pumps and radiant heaters. And we've never provided the restaurants with data on here's the efficiency, here's how low wattage the radiant heaters are, so that they don't have to upgrade a panel necessarily, because this is a big problem with a lot of the restaurants. We want, from our climate plan and sustainability, them to go to electric. And if they have to upgrade a panel for many tens of thousands of dollars and run new major conduit, it's a big deal. But radiant heaters are actually low wattage, and for many circumstances, they may be the preferred option and lower operating costs. The performance, the energy costs of that versus buying propane is far lower. So the return on investment is actually good. We need to, but these restaurants are in the business of running a restaurant. They really aren't knowledgeable in these areas. And I think we need to figure out how to provide them with consolidated information so they can make better choices. One other thing, I haven't heard a follow-up. The Nordic Innovation Center had offered 2 years ago to put in a public parklet that was not for dining. It was for public use, just as a civic investment. I see Brad's ready to jump on this. At the time, we said, nope, can't do it. We only do restaurant parklets. And my understanding is we were rectifying that, but I haven't seen anything happening. Hi, Brad.
Good morning, council member. I wasn't jumping up to respond to that in
Oh, darn.
particular. We could look at that.
Brad, I'm happy to just jump in and close that referral. So we were in contact with the Nordic Innovation House to find a path forward for them. We were working through it as staff to find a solution that would work. They actually withdrew their proposal. So that's why nothing has advanced, is it was on their end. They determined not to proceed with it. But we were assessing how we could find a path forward with them had they wish to continue. And should anyone wish to find a similar public use parklet, staff is prepared to work through those nuances and details.
And I just wanted to respond briefly to some of the, I think you termed them like small near-term issues, Councilmember Burt. We're definitely trying to have a stronger emphasis on those. I think Assistant Director of Public Works, Mike Wong, has been to this meeting a couple times to talk about kind of the litany of enhanced cleaning things that we're doing. We also heard the complaints and we're aware of the condition issues with Lot Q. In fact, I just visited all of those lots, including Lot Q, and discussed some of those issues with Mike Wong a week ago. Also talking with urban forestry about tree grates and trees, trying to make sure we're as proactive as can be on that. We did kind of a punch list walkthrough several months ago now, maybe close to a year actually, but where we looked at many of those types of issues and created a list that we're working to close out. We
How
talked
about,
a
you
number
want
of-
to speak to Newsrex and
Yeah, that's where
other
I was
activity?
going. I did notice on here that we got listed, and this is probably my fault as Sweeney, but we've got the removing the abandoned and damaged news racks as the near term in this fiscal year, and then consolidation midterm, which could mean as much as 3 years from now. We may not finish that consolidation process this year, but we're definitely on a timeline of trying to work towards that. So I think a lot of these things do have a renewed emphasis and are moving.
Glad to hear it. And my recommendation on the things that we have already done or are working on, we want to make sure that these are understood by the property owners, the tenants, and the public. And it should be, here's a list. Here's what we've done. Here's the date. Here's the next things we're going to do. Here's the dates. And right now, we're still having a perception problem because we're doing more than we're really communicating broadly. I mean, I'm sure there's some people who know about these things, but I don't think everybody, just a list, here's all that, we can categorize it in whatever buckets, say boom, 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 here's what we've done, here's the next things we're going to do, here's the dates. And that includes kind of a lot of little things, but it adds up to a change in perception. What's our trend line? We are starting to go in that right direction. Two last things, and I apologize for my long list. One is the issue on loading parking, and this applies to Cal Ave in downtown. And it's compounded by the emergence of DoorDash in recent years. So we've had a real growing trend from shared rides to common carrier deliveries to food delivery services, all creating additional demand for short-term parking. And I haven't seen a strategic plan to recognize how much that demand has grown and how to contend with it. You know, we have Uber cars that routinely stop in the middle of the street, and Amazon blocking traffic in some places, dangerous locations, in part because we haven't adapted and provided the loading areas that would even allow us to enforce violations because they don't have any other place to go. One of the areas that I think we need to look systematically on, Cal Ave and University, is how we utilize our alleys and whether, to what extent, those purposes should be in alleys. And that once we make it provide for there, then we can do greater enforcement. The last thing is just other draws to downtown. The art is great, but other special events. And I'd like to hear a subsequent time because I want to keep the floor longer. What we can do on our special events. We as a council added a special events manager. And certainly, you know, this was something that the Downtown Business Improvement District used to manage. and put on their own special events, and they were good. And when we backed off on that district during the COVID, we've lost special events for downtown. So it's something to reconsider and figure out how to do that. But in this environment, this changing environment, those kinds of things, what brings people to a retail area that find joy in a retail area, we really need to think about that in addition to the physical acts we're doing. So thanks for the update and sorry for the long list.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm gonna just take a step back and say that it was frustrating not to have documents for this meeting. For our sake and for the sake of the public, we're supposed to, give people an opportunity to prepare for meetings. And I feel like we're kind of coming in on the fly and the reason I'm mentioning this, other than to just sort of give off a little bit of the steam of my own frustration right now, is it sort of feels like it's emblematic of what we're talking about. We're talking about things dragging. We're talking about things taking too long. Things are passing us by. Other cities are eclipsing us. We were once the sort of darling of the region in terms of, the downtown. And it feels like lately we've been grinding our wheels. And I'm not blaming anybody. I want us to ask ourselves why. What's going on? Are we not able to deploy enough staff resources to the various tasks because people are so overworked and overwhelmed? That's valid. We ought to know that. Are we not deploying enough financial resources to support whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish? How can we shorten these timelines? It's got to be some function of human resources and financial resources. There ain't nobody that doesn't want to get this stuff done. Everybody's committed to the task, but we seem to be a little bit stuck in neutral or in not the right gear. So I want to ask, because this is one of council's 4 priorities, which is pretty cool and pretty important. And we know that our economic vitalization or vitality really is the engine that drives our ability to do so many of our other things. So I'd love to ask, I think Councilmember Burt referenced the imperative of concrete dates for the near term. And I would love to press for that as well. Because I think when we set concrete dates and hold ourselves accountable to that, it starts to get us in the right gear. I'd like to ask roughly what the operating budget is for our economic development team. I just don't recall, and I'm not in finance anymore, so I'm not looking at those documents.
Steve, you want to respond to that? I mean, it's basically Steve and Ruth. That's it.
That's
And- Right.
Yes, and go ahead.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. But Steve Guagliardo, assistant to the city manager, focused on economic development. As Ed pointed out, we have 2 dedicated staff members for economic development. That's myself and Ruth. We've been lucky enough to have an intern with us over the summer. That's Franklin sitting behind me. But really, that's the core dedicated function. There is very limited funding for additional support. And so we do have some help coming there. And then we have matrix resources like Ashwini helping out on University and Bruce helping out on California Avenue. And then we rely on help throughout the organization to actually be doing and implementing this stuff, and partner departments like Planning and Development Services, like Public Works, and throughout. But really, like the dedicated function, the dedicated staff focused exclusively on economic development, business support, all of that is 2 people.
And I would note that this is as directed by council through the adoption of the economic development strategy. The council approved the creation of an economic development coordinator. Do you remember we had a discussion of what level and what volume of staff? So that's the resourcing we have at this moment in time. And at the same time, to the extent that the council wants to invest additional, it's really a question of where and, how best to invest those resources. I did want to give Brad an opportunity to speak to filling of vacancies, which has been, as council knows, a high priority and a struggle really coming out of COVID. But I think we've got progress to report. So with that, Brad, could you?
Yeah, I'll just briefly speak to that, and I think I mentioned in several settings that over several years, Public Works, and not alone in departments, but has been up at close to 20% vacancy rate. And this has really been a problem. It's It's affected our group that works on CIP projects, and there's still a lot of those projects going on, but it impacts taking on new things. It's definitely been an issue in our operations groups like urban forestry and the team that's out working on streets and maintaining garages and such. So acknowledging that, I do also want to say we've made a lot of progress really in the last year, to the point where I think we're down at below a 10% and kind of reaching what's more normal. And I think our capacity is improving. And also we'll acknowledge that council in last year's budget added a halftime position specifically to deal with parklets and other downtown right-of-way issues. That very great person started 4 months ago or so and is like really fully engaged in those areas now. And that's a big help for us.
So if I could just acknowledge, I agree, and we can gear our future reports around the timelines where things not only are planned, but they're actually happening and have already been completed. So things like the enforcement and tagging of news racks, the implementation really that Ashwini mentioned on the parklets, and as you've noticed on Emerson, parklets are gone to the extent that the street work is occurring and now preparing for those to come back. So, there is a lot more happening real time, perhaps that we can be communicating more clearly.
Thank you. I find myself wondering if the incentives that tend to inspire action in a for-profit environment could be better deployed here within our city efforts around economic revitalization, economic development. Not being an economist, I'm not sure I know exactly what I mean by that, not being a for-profit person. But I guess what I'm saying is, when we're trying to inspire and spur fast, smart action that really results in a turnaround of a trend, I think we ought to be interested in the for-profit environment. How would they do that? What are the incentives that we could bring in-house here to try to think about this differently? Because our time frame does seem to be now working against us. We hear anecdotally, we heard it at the last meeting of this committee, that Burlingame has eclipsed Palo Alto. And I don't know whether that's true or not. And I don't even know how we measure that. But perception matters. And we all want this city to be that gem, that first in class, that special je ne sais quoi place that is Palo Alto. And what we're consistently hearing is, from the look and feel, from the trash, from the parklets, and the whether the streets are clean enough, and the art and the vacancies, there's just this is a trend that needs to be reversed, or we're going to find ourselves sort of sliding downhill. That's my fear. So without having any kind of without being able to offer anything in particular, I want to encourage the city manager's office to tell us, because you've reminded us, city manager, that council was the one that set the sort of the staffing level and
the strategies
and the
focus.
strategies, right? So I hear that, and let's be better partners at figuring out what this team needs to get it done.
Thank you. Appreciate that opening. I would note, as was mentioned earlier, that we will be coming back shortly with the strategies for filling retail spaces. And, much of it is what requires CUPs and the choice of what can be allowed. And we're hearing constantly that that's an issue, and certainly both a policy issue as well as how it's implemented at the counter. That, I think, is one that is definitely ripe for discussion. The other that we've talked some about, and we do want to bring back regularly, is to actually use this forum as a way to highlight the real experiences of businesses that are trying to expand and invest here in town through a set of case studies. And actually, we've asked businesses to let us know. Give us examples of applications you have pending. We'll track them, we'll highlight them, we'll use those as both opportunities to accelerate, but also to look at the systems that may be holding things back. And look forward to having those at future meetings. Ms. Quagler, anything you want to add to that?
I just wanted to echo that call to anyone who's watching either live or on YouTube. Feel free to reach out. Happy to talk about those case studies. And also just following up, we have already had a few people reach out to us and we have successfully navigated with them through city processes to get to a better outcome than they were able to get to before. So that's happening. And I don't want to miss the general as we talk about those specifics. And that's what we're working on, is bringing back that as a general discussion point for this committee and for council to navigate those systems better.
And if I could pick up one specific example, Councilmember Burt mentioned heating. Now, staff may know specifically if we've got any opportunities or areas that we're looking at. But quite frankly, I think our approach has been to let the businesses bring it to us. And they need to tell us what they are considering. And maybe there's a more interactive way that we could support that. At the same time, I don't know that we can prospectively be suggesting particular technologies. We would absolutely love to be very quick reactors to any concepts that businesses would like to propose. And so let me make that as an invitation, either as one of those case studies that we're using or any other way that we can.
Can I follow up on that? So within our SCAP framework, first, this does have a relationship to our initiatives. We do, in fact, identify technologies and recommend them and promote them and incentivize them, from heat pump water heaters to otherwise. In my mind, this is akin to that. There's only a limited number of options. They're categorical ones. There are the open propane heaters. There are propane heat pumps that have to be in a semi-enclosed area to function. There are electric heat pumps, and then there are radiant heaters. And of course, lastly, there are resistance heaters, which are not efficient at all. And so I think those are things that even within our SCAP role, this isn't rocket science. We can simply provide informational guidelines on alternatives and reference case studies on performance and things like that. Just simple things that looking for each restaurant to do that research themselves and make the right choices. I've seen for the last 3-4 years, they're in the dark, and it's pretty obtainable information.
Well, and
Right.
we certainly respect that, restaurateurs in particular tend to be really, really busy people. And so it's really difficult for them to do the research. At the same time, these are projects and they take significant efforts in order to pull together. If you use as an example, and I appreciate it's an extreme example, our heat pump water heater program, we've got a significant interdepartmental team that's been required to even spin that up.
But I'm not talking about an incentive program. I'm talking about just an informational one.
I appreciate that. But again, this is not an area that we are easily able to spin up.
I think I disagree. I think it's easier than it's being envisioned, and we can talk about that offline.
Julie, are you finished with your questions?
No, I had one more thread here. Just to pick up on what Councilmember Burt said about the vacancy tax. High vacancies, but the rents are staying high. It's perplexing as a matter of supply and demand. Why won't they lower their lease rates to attract tenants? And Councilmember Burt kind of laid it out really well. Their low debt basis, their low property taxes, the historical sense that they can wait it out, that Palo Alto will always come back, which may or may not be true any longer. I think the larger problem is when people own property, but aren't necessarily invested in the city's revitalization. In essence, their own self-interest appears to not be aligned with the city's interests. And we have to be very concerned about that and ask ourselves what we're going to do about it. I've been talking about vacancy tax since I got on council. Our streetscape consultants keep telling us whenever I bring it up that it's a punishment of businesses, and that's the last thing we should do if we're trying to attract business. And I repeatedly don't get it, because we have to inject some other mechanism into this supply and demand equation that is off because the business owner's rational economic self-interest does not ally with the city's needs. So I want to continue to ask this. I would love, I love Councilmember Burt's notion that if we were to have some kind of vacancy tax, that those revenues should go directly into the downtown improvement district, which might create a real excitement, actually. That every time somebody basically doesn't cooperate and comply and help us, fill those storefronts, their failure to do that will result in a fee that will go directly into the revitalization efforts. So I think the concept has come forward to council only within the context of the streetscape. That's where I remember it coming up a couple times. And I'd really like us to be analyzing it and considering it. I'd love to know what other cities are doing it and doing it well. What are they seeing? Is it sort of resulting in the equilibrium that we're looking for? Yeah.
Well, I'll play city manager again. This is one of those, again, it would be a project. And so the question that comes to mind is how to prioritize that as a project and identify the resources that would be needed and how to bring that forward. I don't have an answer in the moment here. I think this is something, yes, you have brought it up previously. I'd like to discuss with the city attorney once again on this question of how do we get our arms around the issue and what we might recommend in order to make it a priority. Steve, you have something to add?
I just wanted to circle back to the conversation about supply and demand and the point made by the city manager about what's coming before the retail committee in September, which is the discussion of zoning and land use and what uses are allowed where, what requires a conditional use permit. And as we talk about supply and demand and what spaces are available for what uses, that's an integral part of the conversation. And so I think as we get through that piece of the conversation, it will help inform the next steps in market conditions, which could help inform the prioritization of future work as necessary.
Good. That makes sense. I get it. I get the interrelatedness of these issues. And I look forward to, the outcome of that conversation with the city attorney about the feasibility of pursuing the notion of a vacancy tax. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Pat. So, I really appreciate you, when you came on council, taking on, continuing the conversation about the vacancy tax. I think that's something that I have brought up a couple of years ago about the vacancy tax, and San Francisco has one that they have implemented. And so that was a model that I had asked, for staff to bring forward in order for us to explore. And so I think that's another thing that I appreciate, Ed, that you're saying that you're going to go to the city attorney to review that. But I do believe that we need a timeline on that. It cannot be explored for, I brought that up many years ago and wanted to kind of explore that, but it hasn't happened. So now I think there's an interest in seeing that. So I think that's something to put on the agenda with a timeline. And then also, Steve, you talked about zoning for next month. That's coming to the retail committee?
Yes. So Planning and Development Services has led a conversation through the Planning and Transportation Commission a couple times through a consultant, Michael Baker International, and they've got a series of recommendations and essentially reforms being proposed. PTC has offered their perspective there, and the next stop will be the three of you here at Retail Committee before ultimately proceeding to City Council, depending on the outcome of that conversation.
Right. So I would hope that September, then we want to see all the materials way before the meeting, because I did watch the Planning and Transportation meeting and it was quite involved. And I do have to say that, Ed, when I proposed the economic development staff member and agreed to it, I think I had a bigger idea of what that was, which is including strategically considering how to attract businesses. And so Nothing on you, Steve. You're doing a great job based on what job description you have been given. But I thought that we're going to include also strategically thinking how to attract businesses, which we had to do analysis on. I waited. And then now we have Michael Baker or Barker?
Michael Baker.
Baker doing it. And for $3.5 million, if the paper is reported that correctly, contract.
I don't
So
know.
let's
what
do a
that's-
correction on that. So the contract with Michael Baker is not 3.5
I can't
million.
imagine that's the case. I haven't seen
Because
that
if
article.
that's the
I asked
case,
John late about that, and it's a small fraction.
Oh,
that,
gotcha.
and
This is
that was
the
the
overall
total.
on-call?
Yeah,
okay,
but
let's
One-
correct that on
yeah.
record because I do want to make sure if that can be
Gotcha.
corrected on record so that, you know, I mean, the press had really reported that. And I think if that's what our general public is thinking is what we contracted with one contractor to come up with the strategic economic development for downtown and the zoning changes and so forth, then that's too
I'd be
much.
upset too.
That's way too
Absolutely.
much.
Agreed.
And that's one thing that I want to make sure we correct. The other thing is, what are the regulations? So just to finish up on the zoning that's coming, the zoning changes and the recommendations and so forth, please make sure that we get it way ahead of time. Please make sure the public gets it way ahead of time so that we have time to review.
If I could just touch on that a bit, this is a very good example of how we hope the retail committee can help shape the work before it gets to council. So it can give an opportunity both for the public as well as obviously the committee members to react and weigh in. You know, as Steve pointed out, this has been a discussion at the PTC and they've kind of shared their perspective on what's acceptable in a Palo Alto context, but ultimately the city council really needs to make that call. So we are really looking forward to the opportunity to vet that with this committee on the way to council. And in contrast to today, which was specifically structured as a verbal update of things in progress, we know that there has been a great deal of material put together that can be shared with the committee in advance so you can have informed discussion.
And that's exactly why I'm asking for that broader communication notification to the general public as well as to the businesses so that they can be a part of this. And, you know, to be honest, with the contractor, consultant, whatever you want to call them, they need to know Palo Alto. I mean, yes, they know retail strategies or whatever. I am hoping that they do, but they also need to know Palo Alto and why Palo Alto is the way that it is, why the ideas and the regulations are the way that it is, culture, and then provide recommendations of the changing environment and what the trends are, so the residents can understand or the general public of Palo Alto, the community can understand why we need to do some changes. Obviously, what I read in the paper and watching the meeting, some of the changes is like, you don't know Palo Alto. And there's only a certain extent I think that we can go as far as what the other cities might be doing, or even what other states are doing in their downtowns to revitalize. So, I mean, what the newspaper reported about sleeping pods and all that, that's Japan. That's not Palo Alto. You know, so I think that we want to make sure that we don't go way far off into the stratosphere where there's opposition and there's already a pushback before we can even bring more strategists in. The other thing is we're not talking about, as we're not talking about, we want to have more. So I want to make sure that people, when they're coming in and visiting Palo Alto, they're not going around in circles. So we have the wayfinders for the parking and all that, but we want to make sure that we have sufficient parking, right? And I would be interested to know more about what other cities are doing with their parklet warmers. Is our sustainability push impeding more retail coming in or difficulty with parklets and so forth? But I'd like to know what other cities are doing in terms of their warmers. And also, what are other cities' retail prices for their storefronts, commercial rates? So we have a comparison of where we are. Because I know, hearing from retailers, that the rental prices, the lease prices are high, very high. And as Councilmember Burt, as well as Councilmember Lithcott-Hames has said, that's what we're hearing, and it's an impediment. So let's get some concrete ideas of what it is that is, what other cities are charging. And not cities, I'm sorry, other property owners, so that we have a comparison. And then with downtown as well, and that extends to California Avenue, although we haven't chatted about that yet, or got the update yet, shared rides and loading areas, loading and unloading areas. I think that we need to have some policy about that, as well as enforcements, as Councilmember Burr said, because I do see them just stopping in the middle, not really to the side. So we do have to have areas, especially in this congested area of downtown and California Avenue, also the side streets, to make sure that they're not causing bottlenecks. And then can I just get an update on Emerson Street, on the work there, as well as the timeline of getting the bid together, what is impeding its restarting, getting the group back together?
Good morning, council members. Holly Boyd, Assistant Director of Public Works. So the first phase of Emerson from Channing to Hamilton has been paved. The concrete work has been done. It was paved and striped, finished the last week of July. The contractor then moved to the second phase, which is Hamilton to Lytton. The concrete work has been done. They actually milled out the street yesterday. It's down to the concrete. They're going to crack seal today, pave tomorrow, and then come back and stripe next week. And then that will be done.
Thank you, Holly. And then with regards to the bid,
So consistent with council direction, we had suspended the bid assessment through COVID up until now. The former nonprofit partner that was administering the bid, the Palo Alto Downtown Business and Professionals Association, is all but defunct. And so what we're trying to identify is who can help step into the administration of the bid program. And what that requires is willing business partners and willing folks to help step into that space. And so we're continuing to navigate that conversation as we bring forward the conversation with council about the reactivation of the bid assessment to help provide funding for the types of things the bid did previously and the enhanced maintenance that we've all identified as a priority for downtown.
I do want to ask, council has been funding a lot of the events and activities in order to have revitalization and, excitement. But how do we sustain that continuing on if the businesses and the commercial owners are not involved? So that I think that's something that has to be considered, that the city can continue, I mean, if it's sustainable, to continue to provide funding and also resources in doing all these events, but it's not something that I can see it going on long term. Is that the only way to revitalize and cause excitement to bring people in? And how many can we do if the bid is not involved? These, merchants as well as commercial owners, not just here for University, but also California Avenue, as well as for Midtown, all of our business districts or retail districts. So that's another question that I think that it's something for us to also ponder about and consider going forward. So Brad, just to put you on the spot, so cleaning takes place a lot on University, but how about the side streets? And if it's in front of a storefront, do we contact the owners in order to have them clean up in front of their own storefront, especially if it's vacant? Because I've seen a number of them that are vacant and they have trash all around them. And I don't believe that would be the city's responsibility, but do we contact these owners and tell them to clean up?
I'm not aware of specific instances where we've done that. The cleaning program that we have is the same. It doesn't change based on whether the space is occupied. If you're talking about both the street sweeping of the street and the pressure washing and other cleanup of the sidewalk, that's taking place on University and on the side streets out to a certain point. I don't have the map in front of me. So that kind of makes me question whether the instance you're thinking of might be outside the zone where we have that more intensive cleaning.
Right, because I was walking on Lytton, looking at how many storefronts are open, and there was quite a few that was vacant. And right by the enclaves, where they have their setback or indent for their doorways, there's a lot of trash. There's and they have paper on their
I see.
doors.
So specifically on their private property.
Yes.
And so that might be cleanup that we're not doing.
doing.
I would have
And
to
I
check
would
on
not expect that
for-
city would be doing, but then I was wondering, is there a mechanism where a process where you're actually reaching out to the property owners and say, hey, even though your property is vacant, you still have to keep some order over there where it does not make the rest of the street look untidy.
Yeah, I understand the question. I don't think there's a formal process where we do that across the board. It would be on a case by case basis when we.
Well, the
when we see a problem.
formal process is a code enforcement issue, but that's not the quickest approach. So I think as those situations come to your attention, anyone's attention, let us know, and we will try to approach it informally through contact with the property owner before it needs to go through any formal process.
Okay, so that's so that would be like a Palo Alto 311 matter?
Sure. Yes.
So if that's something that I think a lot of this, because the property owner is not there, they don't see the condition of their property, but people walking by sees it. People going to the businesses next door sees it, and it's not really attractive. So if anything, I think that and I don't expect staff to be walking on each of the street every single day to monitor all of this. So it's something that we need to kind of put forward to other neighboring property owners or neighboring businesses to kind of bring this to our attention. So another effort in notification to say this is how you can let us know what is going on so we can rectify the problem is another way. I mean, I do applaud all the work that Public Works is doing in terms of making sure we have some of the immediate things that the businesses have been asking for all these months, all these years are moving forward. I think we want to make sure it's pleasant when we're walking around downtown, not just University, but the other streets, right? So on the case studies, is this something, I believe it's something maybe that we should know what staff is doing on these case studies as well, right?
Yeah, and that's the plan, is we'll be bringing forward a discussion, kind of rolling it up just one level from like individual things, talking about specific examples, but talking about it in the general sense of hurdles that they encountered, how we navigated those hurdles and what we're doing systematically to address those and make them smoother for future applicants. So
Right.
that's something we anticipate returning to this committee to discuss as we finalize the development of that.
Okay. And so maybe we want to make sure that the public also understand, why does it take 3 years for the news racks to be addressed?
Well, I'll jump in and just say that's one of the things I was trying to address, that I don't think that's going to take 3 years.
Oh, you don't think it's
So
going to take
I
3
think
years?
I think in the presentation we gave you, we did say remove the abandoned ones in the near term, which we defined as the current fiscal year. And then we showed medium term for consolidation. But I think we'll be able to accomplish that much faster than, that suggests the consolidation might not be done for 3 years from now. And
Okay.
that won't be the case.
Thank you. On the university streetscape project, we have the California Avenue one that we're doing, but what with the community meetings that we have monthly, what is the method for University Avenue, including the businesses and property owners?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. So for University Avenue, we'll have the stakeholder working group, which was about 17 members representing various business interests, community partners, and residents. And then within the business interests, there's like property owners, restaurants, retail, different businesses. So we'll have those working group meetings and open to the public as well, so that, people can comment, unlike what was done previously. And then we'll be engaging with the community in general, the greater downtown Palo Alto community, through the various city communication channels and also through open town hall surveys at, again, key milestones. And then all of the boards, commissions, committees, there's several that would be relevant for University Avenue. So it's fairly comprehensive. And again, it'll be the first one now with the stakeholder working group will be talking about scope and costs and things like that, because when we came to council, we were asked to look at different alternatives, right, to bring back. So when we bring back the preferred concept, we'll be coming to you that's informed by the input from the stakeholders.
And is that a monthly kind of meeting like the one that we have for California Avenue?
Yes, we've talked about it once every 2 months, but initially we could have monthly and then go to once every 2 months once the design starts, because then there won't be as much to talk about.
And property owners are also involved in all of this?
Yes.
Okay, great. When do you anticipating it starting?
First meeting in early September. So we're just finalizing the group. We've got applications for all the different interest areas. We're finalizing that, and then we'll be starting in early September. So next time we talk to you, we'll provide you with an update on that.
Great, thank you. That's all for me. Do you have anything to add on?
Just a couple quick follow-ups. So one on the special events, I think the model of wherever possible, partnering with the nonprofits is ideal. One of the things that we've talked about in the context of Third Thursday is, to what extent is it an economic development initiative versus a community serving special events? And I think it's a mixture. Third Thursday, frankly, the Cal Ave in the evenings is so busy that it's really about serving the community more than the businesses. Downtown, it's maybe more economic development, but I think we should think of it as having those two purposes, especially now that our retail areas have become even more places that the downtown is saying that's the future. Retail is how much we are there in addition to workers. Second, on the vacant space, there's another aspect to the problem and a potential solution, and that's activating empty spaces. And so different cities and different private property owners will have practices where those spaces might be used for pop-up art or different functions, and so that they're not just screened walls, which really deaden the areas. Steve, it looks like you might be. chomping on that.
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about one of the objectives within the Economic Development and Transition Council priority, which is to research and evaluate options for just such activations. We are in the process of starting conversations with San Francisco, which has its Vacant to Vibrant program, and the city of San Jose, which has its Moments pop-up program. Just last week, I was on a tour of the Moments with the Silicon Valley Economic Development Alliance, and there's a couple different models out there, just trying to
Good.
figure out what makes sense in the Palo Alto context.
Good. And then on this issue of kind of trashy vacant storefronts, I think part of the issue is that businesses and property owners often don't even know that they have this obligation under current codes to maintain in front of their businesses. So even though we're doing this with greater sidewalk washing and things like that, there is already that existing obligation, and I think we need to have a notification process, both in general and then wherever we see it. If it's an active business, we just give a notification that here's the obligation. We don't have to go to enforcement 80% of the time, maybe, because they just didn't know it was their legal obligation. And then lastly, when Lydia was talking about kind of the economic development office role in sort of an ombudsman fashion, we right now, I think that when we establish that, or we're talking about establishing the position, really, I think pre-COVID, it was more proactive, and I think that we had envisioned that. Now we've consumed that capacity for sort of triaging. But longer term, other cities do have that function, and that could be, rather than the Economic Development Office, it could be out of the development center itself, that there is a deliberate ombudsman role that's more there for retail perspective and other business tenants to how do you work the system? I went through this in San Carlos when I relocated a factory there, and it was really great. And that's exactly it. In that case, it was an economic development manager, pulled together fire, building, all of us. We all sat down together, and he was really a facilitator of those organizations. And when the different departments kind of said, well, our rules are this, that ombudsman, well, how do we overcome these problems? Not by violating policy, but starting to say, well, let's problem solve, as opposed to departments just saying, here's our rule, go away. So just to put that out for thought, I appreciate that it's a bigger topic than that.
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge that is the role that Steve, and to a large extent, actually, Ashwini is also playing with our planning and development services staff, as well as other departments.
Oh, good. Well, then maybe a subsequent meeting, we can get a little more update on that.
Yeah, actually, I referred a person who's interested in opening a cookie shop to Steve so that he can guide her through our process. And so thank you for doing that.
And I referred a Half Moon Bay Diner looking to build restaurant number 2, either in Palo Alto or Burlingame. I referred them to Steve as well. And it's fun to think of who we might attract and what we might be able to do with them.
Of course, certainly, I'm looking forward to the next month's meeting in terms of, what is proposed regarding zoning and what can be done in that way to revitalize, looking at long-term strategy for revitalizing the retail portion as well as small businesses here in downtown. So really looking forward to that. But like I said, like many of us have said, including the public speaker, that, to a certain degree, we're looking at very minute details, but we need to start expanding that and looking at strategic on how to attract businesses here as well. And I think some of the things that we spoke about earlier, pricing, what are the leases with these, with the commercial properties, and what are some of the impediments to why people were not being a destination town, right? So I look forward to hearing more about that. If there's no more comments or questions, then we can move on to the next item, which is an update on California Avenue Business District.
Thank you, Chair Koo. Thank you, Ashwini and Brad. So on Zoom, we have my colleague Bruce Fukuji joining us to walk us through California Avenue. As a quick time check, we are at 10:20. So Bruce is going to do a bit of an elevated flyover to make sure we have plenty of time for engagement with council. Also just want to recognize your time and potential constraints there.
Yeah, and as it happens, I'm going to need to leave by 11.
Me too.
I've already canceled my 10:30. I do think a flyover is not necessarily, I mean, I think we want to hear what Bruce wanted to say today as a matter of momentum.
Yep, and he'll be able to get into that. It's just, we'll navigate through the entire presentation. I just want to make sure, again, we're getting into conversation and substance with the council and committee as well. All right, Bruce, floor is yours.
Hi, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Sorry I wasn't able to be here in person this morning. So I'm going to cover both near-term improvements and the California street design process. Just briefly on near-term improvements, next slide. There's a lot of work going on with Caltrans and how to adapt the Caltrans bicycle improvements to the solution that's moving forward for near-term improvements for California Avenue. So there's a very clear vision of what that is, and we're working through the details with Caltrans on what that is. That vision's in the illustration there, but I'm not going to go through all the details of what this is, and we can come back to this if there's any questions about it. But basically, Caltrans is starting their repaving work in September, going from from north to south, so Sand Hill Road. And so, they'll be getting to this area probably kind of the end of September, early October. And that's the repaving, and then the striping work happens after that, starting no earlier than September 20th. So we're meeting with the Caltrans contractor to look at the details of how they can implement the colored stamp crosswalks, which I think is really, really great. And we're meeting today with the city's paving contractor, to work on coordination items for how to implement this stuff in the next couple of months. So this is all moving forward. Next slide. Just to refresh everybody's memory around what was decided for the near-term improvements at El Camino, Cal Avenue, Birch, and Ash. We're looking at retractable bollards. These are ASTM F3016 engineered. It means that they're able to stop a 5,000-pound vehicle going, between 20, almost 30 miles an hour. So safety first and thinking about that, but they're assisted so that instead of being very heavy, there's actually much lighter for people to be able to lift them up or press them down, and they're key operated. So that's the product after looking at a lot of different products that we're going to move forward with, talking with our contractor about installation of that. And that they were looking at both row and clustered plantings with fiberglass, really beautifully colored fiberglass planters and plants. I'm very excited about how this is going to look. I'm not going to get in all the details of that right now, but just wanted to highlight that's all in process. Next slide. The last time we met really was in April. A lot has happened since then. We did a bidding process. We got bids for all the different components. We're now in the onboarding of contractors for being able to do that. As I mentioned, we're meeting with a paving contractor this afternoon to actually look at the details of how to implement all this. We've already, and just big picture, given how brief the time is that we have here, is that we're looking at how to integrate with Caltrans and the striping and paving. That's really going to be a kind of driving a bit of when the contracting work gets done. So it's all done sort of at one time. But we're looking at implementing these things really in the kind of October, November timeframe. And I'm happy to answer questions and get into more detail on this. But after this afternoon, we'll have a better idea of how the contractor wants to execute doing the work. We're working with purchasing on the purchasing of the bollards and the plant materials, and the landscaping work would happen actually after probably the last part of it. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So on the car-free streets planning, next, back one, I think you skipped a slide. Let's see. Can you go forward? One more. All right. Well, okay, that's fine. When we met in April, we were reporting on the work that was done by February, March, and April. in the May retail committee, our next meeting with the merchants happened after that meeting. So there's a lot that's happened since the last time we met. We had the refined signage concepts and circulation analysis was presented to the merchants. We did some workshopping and all of that. In June, we presented a way of framing the alternatives, our evaluation criterion process, and I'm going to highlight some of the things around that. In July, we met with the merchants on outdoor dining and patio guidelines, and here in August, we now have all the results from our online survey. And I wanted to share some of the highlights of a lot of things that have happened since we've met last. And then just in terms of our other community engagement, which we're expanding, we met with Stanford Research Park folks. We did a third Thursday open house in May. Went to the Evergreen Block Party in June. Had an online meeting with all the Palo Alto neighborhoods here in August. We've had over since January, we had 3 retail committee meetings now, and now I've had over 930 people respond to the survey. So we've really got some great feedback in terms of how we're moving forward. And so I'm just going to touch on some of the main things that we've been learning from this process and it's kind of roadmap how we're going to advance the project. Next slide, please. I think that on the survey results, we are when we framed this up, there was a couple of things we did. One was, council direction back in November was to initiate a branding program based on historic and contemporary strengths of California Avenue in the Mayfield district. And so, we gave Urban Field Studio the kind of direction to think about that. And they came back and said, hey, let's do a visual preference work first with the merchants and with residents of the, others. And we did that. And it's very interesting what came out of that results. They had 3 different concepts, sort of, optimistic modernism came in sort of as like the top leading candidate, for what should be the signage and branding character for the street. Number 2 is sort of artsy saloon, and number 3 is upscale contemporary. And it's interesting that 2 did so well compared to 3. A lot of people felt like contemporary was kind of how things should go. But I think that what happened is that this relation to historic things about Mayfield District, the sort of like body aspects of that are kind of an attractive thing, and then the arts, the avenue of the arts, like blending those 2 things together resonated with a lot of people. But basically, what I think that what really kind of was the kind of final thing was that people really wanted to have something that was appealing to people of all ages and all groups, that would be fun, kind of lighthearted, tied to mid-century modernism, but not be tied directly to it, but draw on some of those elements because there's so many components of doing that. So I think that that's really what kind of drove that one, that it had the right kind of attitude. So our consultants are going to we're taking like over 600 comments that we've gotten about them, and we're going through those, and we're looking at what refinements need to be made to help move that concept forward in some version of it. Next, please. And I think the other thing we did is I'm sure you took the survey, we asked people's opinions about street design elements and how to rank them and what their preferences were. And I just want to highlight 2 really important points about this. One is that there's a lot of alignment around community members and merchants. We did a workshop with merchants where we rolled out all those things. We did kind of dot exercises, a whole engagement process around that. And what we did was we wanted just to see where's alignment and where are some differences. And I just want to highlight kind of a couple of things. There's clearly people like the idea of continuous pedestrian environment. They like the idea of adjacent and separate bike and pedestrian lanes and outdoor dining unique to each business. But 2 things that did come up I want to mention: the merchants that they wanted to look at options for no bikes. And we had a lot of debate about that. The position we've taken as council direction is very clear, and that's what we're implementing. And then on the outdoor dining, it was very interesting. We got a lot of opinions on this, and I'll talk about this more. But there was this real interest in wanting to look at kind of similar prefabricated, pre-approved solutions when we did this. But then we had a meeting on this last month, and we had a slightly different take on it. So I think there's some mixed opinions. I think it depends on a range of possible things to do there. I'll get into that later. But this thing around having seating with shade structures or tree groves, I think are really important sort of visions. And also that people want to have places to sit. There's just not enough places to sit and be able to hang out with people on that street at all, especially compared to other urban areas. And then how to integrate public art and being able to make that as sort of like one of the reasons to be in those places. And clearly alley and overhead lighting was a big deal. And then what to do about having expanding events and activities, especially holiday or night markets, is very interesting. There's a lot of other results, but just high level, that's kind of what are the highest ranked things that people want to see. Next. I think that this alternatives framing, I think is, I'm just be very brief on this. We're taking an approach that's not the traditional approach where you go and collect a lot of information and then have sort of these creative visioning sessions. And then as more people get involved, more creative ideas happen and the number of needs and concepts expand. And then you end up creating solutions that get costed after the fact, that end up being very high and take a long time to implement or are not affordable. We're not doing that traditional approach. We're taking a completely different approach. And the merchants really appreciated this, and it really stemmed from some of the first meetings that we had with them. Is like, how do you frame things as sort of levels of kind of investment? And the way we're thinking about this is like on the sort of one end, how do you just adapt the street? What are the things you could do that are lower cost, short term, easy to implement things that address the aesthetics and function of the street, that can meet council objectives, and at the same time kind of not reimagine, but adjust the aesthetics and function of the street so that it's able to sort of meet a whole new set of possibilities, like what can be done on that level. And then at the same time, looking on the other end, if you want to really reimagine the street, and really if you want to have more extensive tree canopy and a continuous pedestrian environment with bike lanes and a central multi-use public space, like really what's involved with being able to do that. And then just to in talking with Ed about this, and he always has so many great suggestions. One of the things that he said, well, maybe we should think about adapting as like an early thing, and then this could lead to in the future a way to be able to do other improvements to reimagine the streets. There's some way to phase or structure this stuff. So that's where we are. We started to look at all that. Next slide. I just think it's helpful just to, Urban Field Studio provided some images just to kind of think about what some of the elements are around these kinds of things. And we're going through, and I'll talk more about the process for how do we get to solutions. But one way to treat dining outdoors is there could be some uniform materials and planters that are on the street. You can resurface the street. You could do paving with murals and other things, but just take all the traffic markings off and sort of reclaim the street. Make some minor adjustments in curb locations, which would help the efficiency of the circulation of the street. Look at how to separate pedestrians and bikes, creating different zones. Introduce, shade structures. I think that's going to be an important component of how to think about street adaptations, and then designating places for public use and planters. And there's a lot to be said around the complexity of creating a car-free street, but at the same time has the farmers market needing to be serviced every week. So to design a street that functions well for outdoor dining, functions well for the farmers market, provides bicycle movement through that's safe and separated from pedestrians, and then how do you create public spaces where the farmers market's not? It's multi-use, and how do you have a couple of different ways of being able to look at that? Those are really the sort of the design problems that we're looking at right now. And then the next slide. And then thinking about, reimagining the street as a whole. I mean, there's a lot that can be done, but just in looking at, there's been such broad interest in what do you do about this, the tree canopy, and that just, can be very compelling, but it's very complex and quite frankly could be very expensive things to do given the utilities and in the street and the need to, it would trigger the sort of city's stormwater pollution prevention program, which is a beautiful thing, which I completely support. I think it's got a lot of fabulous amenities, but it ends up creating a lot of bio retention swales and other features that are needed in order to support the stormwater in the street. So you're going to having to really rethink how to do the infrastructure of the street as a whole to do that. And then when you do that, it does open up a lot of really interesting opportunities around how to do that. So that's a question. And then there might be some ways to really think about, instead of, we're looking kind of two options, like if the bike lane sort of goes down the center of the street, which is council direction, but also maybe looking at meandering it so that you can adapt it to be able to maximize outdoor dining or public space or multifunctional spaces and how they're used. And then how to intertwine that with pedestrian movements. So I think that's something we want to look at, overhead lighting, and then really looking at how to add seating planters and figuring out how to create attractive, functional public spaces that are multi-use. So that's kind of where that would go. Next slide. And then the other thing I just thought it would be helpful to highlight, that was the June discussions was that, and then in July, we've been talking about outdoor dining patio guidelines, getting merchant feedback. We did a preference exercise with them on a whole range of topics. So this is only highlighting one. We covered things related to shelters or enclosures, lighting, planters, traffic barrier, a whole set of different things. Got a lot of preferences. But what we were trying to focus on was answering this question of what would you do? What would you, if you can just invest in doing something, you know that you could do it, what would you want to do? What would you want permitted? So we could figure out how to streamline that. And then what would you not want to have in the business next to yours that you feel detract from your business? So we kind of did that through all these 8 or 9 different elements. We got some great feedback on that. But what was really interesting is where it landed. I think that this high quality materials, finishes, and planting is just top of mind. If it's going to be redone, it's going to be a beautiful thing. The desire to do that, really take advantage of it being car free, so you minimize all those traffic safety features that separate people from experiencing and being outdoors. So it doesn't have to be so enclosed. And we thought was really interesting is how do you permit individual business expression, but still have overhead shelter from rain, sun, wind, be able to do outdoor merchandising. There was a lot of support for doing that, but minimize branding, like don't have giant signs that say each restaurant and all that kinds of stuff. So we had some very useful feedback that we got from that. And that's mostly on trying to think about how to do the outdoor guidelines. We're seeing that as like a separate document that would be addressing the Cal Avenue itself. It could apply to Ramona Street with a few minor adaptations. So that's what we're looking at, and that's a work in progress. The next slide. So what's next? I really want to do this next outreach is really focusing not on merchants. It really wants to focus. We're going to meet with the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee on September 3rd. Really looking forward to that, to just get right into the pedestrian bike circulation issues. We want to go back and meet with the farmers market around how we've laid out opportunities for the number of stalls and the way it should be structured for optimizing farmer market use. Go back and visit with Stanford Research Park, but I really want to continue to meet with the other residential neighborhoods, College Terrace, Evergreen Park again, have a community workshop and really focus on these two things. How do you do safe pedestrian bike circulation? Is it like a straight shot or do you meander it? Are there a lot of different strategies for how to slow bikes down? And at the same time, how do you do vertical elements? Are there any? And then to really look at the kind of way to be able to attract seniors, teens, families, parents, just like the whole diversity of the folks that comprise what's wonderful about Palo Alto community, to have a way so that this can be a third place for their life, to be able to spend time and like how to program these spaces to be able to do it. And then look at how there could be some maybe dedicated space for doing that. And also how do you share that with the farmers market? So I want to explore those topics. When we get feedback on those things, then we'll be able to really lay out, the street designs. So the next slide. So this is missing. There was one other thing I want to show, but that's fine. Just sort of lay out the street design so we can come back and kind of have another. We'd like to come back to council and have a community, open house, with these sort of alternatives so that we could sort of show kind of the direction this thing's going and get your feedback and then develop that into the final plan. To get to the dates for when we go to council with this thing as a final action, we're working on that. We is having a CEQA, the on-call planning contractors, to help provide a CEQA, a proposal for the CEQA work and how long it'll take. We're supposed to get that this week, and then we can really map out the remaining part of the calendar to kind of go through all that with you. We can provide that as a briefing for the next update. So, all right, that's my very high level briefing. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Julie?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Bruce, thank you so much. What an exciting presentation with velocity. I want to commend you for walking us through your process, updating us on progress. The timeline was really specific and detailed, and it really feels that there is a momentum to this. And I just congratulate you and everyone who's been working with you on this. It leaves me feeling very excited and optimistic. I do note on the near-term improvement schedule, again, terrific slide. The very last item is the district sign, and I'm reminded that Councilmember Burt had observed to his delight after a conversation, he had observed some city signs that he really thinks highly of, which he thought were done by outside designers, turned out to be done in-house. I think you made that point, and it's clear. I would like to ask Director Eggleston, do we still have those designers in-house? Are we planning to work with the folks we have who've already done great signage in the city to update the California Avenue sign or the district sign? Who's deciding that? What efforts are being made to bring it into alignment or with what's already out there and great, or are we going in a different direction?
I think I would need to ask Bruce what the current plan is. I haven't been involved in this recently. It is the case that staff that were involved in the signs that Councilmember Burt brought up are still with the city.
Great. Well, Bruce, could you let us know what your thoughts are there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the roadmap on this was, we've been doing two things concurrently, working with our consultant, urban, Liz Brooke, who's been doing the signage work for Urban Field City, who's been great. We wanted to get all this, feedback and then now go back with it and then provide her with direction to develop their sign program. And part of that is to help, lay out what would be needed for the district sign that we've been talking about, both on, El Camino and Cal Avenue and also on, Oregon Expressway. So they would do that work, and then they have a concept. Now, in parallel, we've been contacted 3 different sign fabricators. There's one sign fabricator that I met with. We actually went out on site to get an early bid from them around what it would cost to do this work, and they have some design work that's part of their services for being able to help fabricate prepare what's needed to fabricate the sign, and then to be able to install the sign. And so there's some feedback I'm getting from them to share with Liz too around the work that they're doing. But the goal was to actually have our consultants' design work actually be the content for the signs, and to work with the sign fabricator for whatever modifications are needed for what's necessary for them to fabricate and then install the sign. So that's kind of how we've been looking at it. It's Peter Jensen and Public Works and I've been working on how to kind of navigate this. So I think that we're he and I kind of would be the ones to be overseeing what the design elements would be, based on the feedback that we've been getting. So that's the current process.
Okay, I wasn't able to track all the details there. So Pat, which were the signs that you were praising? Was it the Art Center?
Well, yeah, there's the whimsical signs. That's more as a potential kind of gateway.
Yeah.
Although it does really, I think, apply to the other signs that we're looking at. I just, it sounds like there's a lot of momentum there, but I really question whether we've turned this into a prolonged process where we really had the resources to, maybe get 80% a year ago, as opposed to waiting and waiting.
So what I want to just add to that is the when we think about signage, big signage dotted throughout the city, it's really an issue of city branding, and what a lovely opportunity there is as we really bring California Ave to its next incarnation. To really think, do we want the signage to reflect other cool things that are happening around the city? There's that whimsical approach also on with similar colors on Arastradero and Charleston, and I don't know whose job it is to sort of take that sort of overall branding and design view of not public art, but city signage. And I just hope that there is a nice coordination happening. If we do have the talent in-house, I would love to see us strongly consider, whether that's the right way to go here.
I probably should comment on that. What you're describing actually, unfortunately, is not a function we have in-house. Actually, John Late, our planning director, had long wanted to bring on a city architect effectively that would have that citywide perspective on how the look of public infrastructure would kind of weave consistently. But unfortunately, that's not something that we've undertaken over the course of many years. I do think, as it relates to Cal Ave, there's perhaps a difference of approach that we are using here, and I'll tee it up, and Bruce, you can confirm if I'm reading it correctly. But where he described and showed some graphics on the signage that have been discussed with community members, that's really reflecting the approach of wanting to have some consistency in the aesthetic, both at the gateways as well as in the district itself. And so the distinction here maybe between a single, what could be in some ways conceived of as an artwork versus a program. And he's really, I think, referring to a program where the aesthetic is used throughout the district rather than on an individual basis. So Bruce, correct me if I got that wrong.
I think that's correct. I think we're a little bit challenged in that the scope of work for this contractor is very limited in terms of what they can do. So it's not really a scope where they can really develop a whole, comprehensive signage program. I think what they're trying to do is sort of really connect on what's the kind of sort of preferences for the visual identity that then can be developed further into a program. So, I think that what they're and then to create some very clear examples of what that is, and then identify what the vocabulary of design elements are for how to do that. Now, that's probably not the answer anybody wants to hear, but that's kind of the challenge of trying to get the contractor to do a lot for their contract. So we're asking them to do a lot for their contract. You know, so but the goal, because of the desire to be able to have a clear identity on El Camino and over on Oregon Expressway that shows that the district's open for business, has been the overriding concern. We've been looking at how to advance this for those things as far as we can.
Okay, got
So
it.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. I appreciate that.
No.
I understand it. One last question. I know time is short. I was curious about what holiday and night markets mean. Can you just give like a 1 to 2 sentence description of what we might have in mind under those categories?
Yeah. Holidays, for example, for Halloween, you can like have a Halloween market. I mean, there could be some really wonderful things around that, or obviously Christmas or other holidays for all different denominations. For a night market, it's like having could be like a farmer's market that's at night, or it could be other, urban sort of retail pop-up activities that happen at night. But the idea that people can come after work in the early evening, especially in the, sort of fall, and early springtime, could be really, really attractive. People love that idea, so that it's a lit environment that you're experiencing, you're walking through. That's kind of what that would be.
It's great. Oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to add one thing. And so as we look at those types of activations, one of the things we also want to keep in mind is tying in and being a complementary offering to the businesses that are already sited on the street. So I just want to make sure we don't lose track of that as we talk about these things that help activate the space. Is those markets help bring people in, and then how do you get them from visitors to the street to patrons of the businesses?
Having attended one of the meetings with a business community some months ago, I sense from your report, Bruce, that there is that buy-in and a sense of joint purpose and optimism is increasing. Could you give us a brief sense of your take on that?
Yeah, I would say that we, notwithstanding that the summer was hard for a lot of, for people's schedules to all be accommodated. The basic trend has been, increasing interest and participation. So I think that that's been really, really constructive. And I think when we started in January, we kind of really had a big corner to turn around sort of just establishing something on a regular basis. And I think, Steve's been great at being able to support making that happen and to meet the merchants where they're at. And it's created a good balance between what he's doing and what I'm doing to help move things forward. So I think that we're in the best place we've been so far in terms of working with them.
That's great. Nothing more for me. Thank you.
Councilmember Florida.
Yeah, I'll try to go rapidly through mine because we're running out of time. First, on the planters, are those planters that would be distributed throughout the street, or are they at intersection and traffic blocking type planters, or both?
Yeah, they're located to do three things. One is to block traffic, to sort of reduce, bicycles going everywhere to kind of help focus them where they need to go, and create identity for the
But a
entrance.
quick question,
But
what
they're
I'm trying
not
to understand
throughout the
is,
whole
are
thing.
some of them at locations that are just distributed throughout the street for purposes other than at like intersections?
No, these are
Okay.
just really
Okay,
that,
then I would recommend that we do that. We have that dilemma that we talked about and looked at concepts of future extending the canopy into the street. We could do this as a near term through planters at certain locations, not comprehensively, but we have these dead areas where it's pavement and we've got chairs and stuff there, but just having some scattered planters with, small size trees that you get from just relocated planters, I think would really change the feel quite a bit there.
yeah.
So that's a recommendation. Second, that what you have on slide 5 with this timeline has some real concrete understandings, although what I'd like to see is this get out there physically on the street at locations. So all the patrons and all the businesses who even don't attend the meetings, everybody sees that we've got this concrete timeline with perhaps a little more detail in it, but put it up on placards and look for other ways to get it out to everyone. And then I just note on the in-house, these whimsical signs. We have 3 at the Children's Library, the zoo and museum, and the Art Center, and they're all installed over a number of years. And I appreciate the concept of a city architect and the value that would be there, but we didn't need a city architect to do those. And they are viewed by the public as really good, some of our most endearing public art. And none of us knew it for a long time, or most of us still don't know, that it didn't go through the art commission. It was a staffer. Frankly, I think we ought to recognize that staffer. People love those. It is one of those things in the community that just people have a lot of affinity toward. And I just want to make sure that we don't get bogged down in a process where we didn't need that process in the past. Somehow there were executive decisions that were good decisions and got them at those 3 locations. There are also some existing signs, if I recall, there's still like ash and things like that, or there are stop signs and things like that. And I saw somebody saying, oh, bikes aren't stopping at the stop sign at ash, and there's no intention to. I think they're still there and not even covered. Most people realize that they're inactive, but why they're still there is a question. On the question of the bike lanes, one concept is that when we first closed streets, we had people walking down the center because there was social distancing for COVID. And once we got past that, it became a social norm to walk down the center, which meant that the additional pedestrians were not walking in front of the retailers. And the retailers were not getting that benefit in that way that they could of additional pedestrians. And I want to make sure that's conscious. We really want those additional pedestrians to be seeing the retailers and as a result, hopefully patronizing them more. And then same story we talked about on University and loading areas. One in particular that I've heard about is Vino, that prior to the street closure and COVID, they had apparently, and this my understanding is they had 3 loading spaces in the alley, which were very important. They sell cases of wine, and customers need to be able to load. And the customers, when they lost that, they were then trying to use available on-street parking. Now they don't have either of those. And I think it's an easy solution. And there may be other businesses that are exceptionally reliant on needing some loading that could either be in the alley or on street, but preferably all the time it would have been the alley. Now they don't have the on street. And I think it's way overdue. We've talked about using alley spaces. I think we need to have a sense of urgency so that we don't have real winners and losers and lose businesses because of something that we took away and they don't have any substitute, and we could have accommodated it some time ago. Steve, did you have a quick response? I
just wanted to offer one response, and Director Eggleston may want to correct me if I don't get it quite right. But one of the things that did happen as well was the conversion of permit-only spots in that lot behind Vino being removed. And so now they are all 3-hour parking spots, which does increase the availability of parking as well. I hear you loud and clear on the issue of loading, and that will be factored in the conversations we have about Cal Ave in the future. I just want to recognize.
I don't want it in the distant future. I'm looking for it in the near term to address this, and that we don't lose. We've got kind of, for some of these businesses, a near crisis. 3-hour means that they lose that for the loading. They lost the loading on Cal Ave. They lost the loading in the alley. They're a business dependent on loading. It ain't rocket science to say we need short-term parking. Now, we do have the problem of DoorDash folks occupying a lot of those spaces and things, but let's not turn this into a big project. I think this is a short-term triage solution for certain of those businesses. Lastly, on the permanent parklets, we've had years of Cal Ave not having the opportunity to put in permanent parklets. We had a temporary measure 2 years ago that said, well, we're going to take away their tents, and same council motion was to have a permanent solution. We took away the tents for the winter, and we don't have the permanent solution still. It doesn't sound like this timeline is going to let this come to the council and let them install permanent parklets. When we took away tents, we were worried about opaqueness. We were worried about certain fire safety things, but really it was that they were opaque and intruding into the street. It wasn't regulated. We now have seen that they put up transparent walls. You can have transparent ceilings in walls. They could have that the walls are required to be up during the day and only down at night and in the winter. But we need something that will allow those businesses to not lose that dining in the winter if they want to maintain it. There are solutions, and I think we did half of the council direction, which without the coupling of the other half that was supposed to give them a solution. We just took away an option for some reasons that were valid, but we need to figure out a way that we can have a compromise until we have the permanent parklets. Thanks.
Thank you. So my colleagues have discussed a lot of the immediate ones. And I just want to reinforce some of the things that I mentioned during the University Avenue, which is more strategic. What is the plan on engaging and attracting new businesses, ensuring, the vacant storefronts, finding out what are the lease prices in other cities, which is comparable to California Avenue. Of course, there's University, which is a little bit different, and then there's California Avenue. But I don't want to only know what is California, which is, the main street, but also what are the side streets lease amounts. And also, some of the warmers and, on the street for the restaurants, for the businesses, similar. I want to know what are the costs over there. On one of the signage, it says, on one of the signage, it says, live, dine, no, shop, dine, play, live. I was just kind of gonna say, maybe consider play instead of live, because we already live here, right? So maybe play might be something that we should be looking at. In terms of outdoor dining and patio guidelines, as long as it doesn't impede neighboring businesses, I think Bruce already mentioned that. Regarding art, California Avenue in that area, Mayfield, is also very much historical, has a historical aspect. Maybe consider also places where there's monuments or artwork showing how history played into that. Then I think Julie talked about night market. One of the merchants out there, he adjusts his closing and opening times based on what he believes the business is going to be on the street at the height, right? So I don't know if that can be suggested also to some of the merchants out there. Planters, I love the green, I love the color and all that, but long term, I look at Stanford Mall, they have their planters that is always beautiful, always taken care of. If we're going to use planters, then we need to have dedication towards that. And then there are cities that do not allow bikes rolling on their closed streets, and they encourage walking their bicycles. And now we have to kind of also think about the other modes, because I see skateboarders and they're all mechanical now, electric. They're the scooters that are electrified, so they go booking down the street. And I know oftentimes there's not very many people on it during the afternoons. However, you don't know when somebody's going to suddenly walk out. And so, trying to minimize accidents. So there's also the need for consideration of whether they walk it or they can bike it. But I think dedication would really help with addressing some of this. And I'm really interested to know, so the parklets or they don't have parklets yet, but they can move the restaurants can move their tables and chairs out onto the street. I guess right now there's no cost to it, but at some point I'd like to know what is the cost, to the city and how much they can move out. So some more regulations about that. But overall, yeah, I think whimsical signs, I think, are you saying whimsical signs with an identity to that street, to that district, or?
Well, and to the functions there, it's like the ones that we have, at the library, it's got books and things in the whimsical. At the zoo, it's got things there. Here, it might be produce and dining and who knows what.
Okay. I just want to make sure that there's an identity towards that district. And just a clarification, I don't think we have a staff member who did the whimsical signs. I think previously there was a California Avenue signage that was perhaps done by a staff member, but I don't know if it's staff member that did the whimsical signs. That's what we're saying.
That's what
Okay,
Brenda said.
I just want to make sure we clarify on that, because I don't remember that, but when I was a liaison, it was just the normal
Point signs
sign,
on Cal Ave. These are the three. We're talking about the signs that
the
are
whimsical
at the
signs.
zoo, the children's library, and the art center.
Okay, so that's true that a staff member was the one who generated these whimsical signs.
Well, I think that's true at the Arts Center. I'm not sure about the others. I think the others were done in conjunction with the projects, but go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not overstating this, or that something I've said is not being taken too
That's what I'm
far.
trying to clarify.
We did have, my understanding is we had a staff member who helped work on the initial conceptual ideas. I think they still worked with a designer and it went through a whole signage program. So it may not be that dissimilar to what the process Bruce is taking us through now.
Okay, well, maybe we could revisit that and get
Yeah.
the facts.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's what I want to clarify. So we're not expecting too much from staff when when it was not really that way, or if it's staffed, then it might take a shorter time, but if it's not really staffed, then suddenly it takes a longer time that we don't have some pushback on it. So let's have some clarification if that was not enough clarified. Anything else? Anything else? Nothing from staff? Then I know Midtown Business District, can we just make that the top item for our next meeting? Number one item?
We certainly can. The other thing I just wanted to offer as the Midtown update is that work is underway at the site of the Middlefield fire. And so if you drive by, you will see crews out there. They are working to deal with the topsoil mitigation and install the shoring necessary for the building to go up. The only other update is we continue to try to activate those merchants, but no progress as of yet in terms of reconvening that group on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Koo, I'll just say we have no requests for public comment for item 2 or 3.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. I forgot about public comments. Such an interesting discussion. Thank you for the for the updates and during our robust discussions. And I think we already discussed future meetings. So if there's nothing else, then we will adjourn. Thank you.